You're about to listen to a new episode of the Redefining CyberSecurity Podcast with Sean Martin. Have you ever thought we're selling cybersecurity insincerely, buying it indiscriminately, and deploying it ineffectively? Well, perhaps we are. Let's look at how we can organize a successful information security program that integrates business culture with people, process, and technology to drive growth and protect business value.
Imperva is the cybersecurity leader whose mission is to protect data and all paths to it with a suite of integrated application and data security solutions. Learn more at imperva.com.
At Level Blue, we simplify securing your most valuable business assets by providing broad cybersecurity experience and award-winning services. Level Blue manages the risk. You reap the reward. Learn more at levelblue.com.
And here we are. You're all very welcome to a new episode of Redefining CyberSecurity here on ITSPmagazine. This is Sean Martin, your host, where I get to talk to all kinds of cool people about cool things, cyber-related. So hopefully we can do what we need to protect the businesses and the people we serve in society, and with all the technology we use. And for this episode, you probably see that Marco snuck his way in somehow. So,
it's the cool people, and then me,
and then Marco, exactly. So Fred, if you haven't figured it out, Fred's the cool one, and Marco snuck in. Well, Marco's on because it's a topic. Two things for this topic. One is we spoke to Fred last year as part of our Black Hat coverage, event coverage, and Fred has some updates, and it's very connected to sociology, so society and the impact it has on not just business, but us as humans overall. So I figured Marco would have some fun having this chat with me. So Fred, it's good to have you on again.
Yeah, thanks for having me. It's great to be here, and I'm pretty excited to share some of our updates and what's happened since last year.
Absolutely. And for those wondering, not to be confused with the episode that's part of this year's coverage that we just had with Fred. So be sure to check that one out as well. But this is a follow-up to the episode we called Hacking Humans Using LLMs and devising and detecting phishing LLMs versus small human models. So that was the talk last year, and we're going to dig into a few points from some of your recent findings and understanding of what's going on. But before we do that, Fred, maybe a quick word just to refresh folks of what you're up to these days.
Yeah, that makes sense. I'm a research fellow in computer science over at Harvard School of Engineering and Applied Science. I've since very recently also started a fellowship at the political school at Harvard Kennedy School, which is, we're going to talk a little bit about that regarding this AI phishing project as well, because in my last years, I've really started branching out to see the sort of intersection of policy, technology, and business in the context of cybersecurity. So historically, a lot of my research has been purely technical, but as of last year, I do more and more projects that are related to social aspects of security, but also related to society in general, because it's there's a lot of complex turns and twists to cybersecurity and to solve cyber problems, and I'm really living in that intersection now and seeing how to take the technical solution and make them useful for society and also feasible for businesses to implement.
And so, what were some of the biggest changes in the last year? I mean, I have a lot of questions of has it changed here, but instead of me guessing, maybe if you can kind of highlight some of the changes you've seen. Have things panned out as you expected based on the last chat we had, or what's going on?
I think they did. So the first thing I had to say to sort of further my own cause a little bit is that you probably remember this, but a few weeks after Black Hat, when I talked about AI phishing last year, there was a phishing attack that resulted in all of the MGM casinos were shut down. And that's it's kind of fun in a way. It's of course not fun, it's terrible, but we talked this big security conference. I talk about how social engineering is a big nuisance and we should really increase our protections. And just a couple of weeks later, the very casino where we had our conference was shut down. And I think they're estimated to have lost $100 million in revenue because, if I remember correctly, there were a couple of folks who worked there who were targeted of pretty savvy social engineering attacks, where the people looked up information online and then found things to use, and then they could trick them. And this is exactly a segue into what we do on our study now, because last year we proved that phishing emails can be automated using language models. That's quite intuitive. Language models are great at creating textual content that appears realistic. Oftentimes the content is not true, but this is exactly what you need to do to trick people. And we talked a little bit about how you can add human models to make it even better and so forth. But what we looked at in the following year since that is, how can we take this further? So, okay, we know that language models can create phishing emails, but that's not all, because you also need to find out background information about target and send the emails and analyze this. And we've been playing around with the concept of what are attackers likely to do? Well, attackers are likely to do the worst thing they can do. So we've been thinking about this, and that's why we created a tool that now automates all parts of the phishing chain. So as we see it, it's five steps to it. First, you collect information about the participant. Then you create the email, personalized email. Then you send out the email, and you validate and learn from the results. And this is really, really cool. There's a lot of things that happens here. And one thing that we started working on quickly after Black Hat last year is we started to collaborate with some economics people and researchers to see what does this mean in practice. And we added some work terms in terms of what's an hour for an attacker worth. We tried to quantify various aspects of phishing attacks. By doing this, we could quite quickly see that we have a unique situation, which very rarely happens right now, which is that phishing attacks become more powerful, they become more capable using AI, but they also become cheaper. And this is really bad. Like oftentimes for the past 20 years, you have to select if, do you want a cheap phishing attack that's not as powerful, or do you want a really good phishing attack that's a bit more expensive because it takes more time to launch it. Right now you can combine them. And we wanted to see, well, what does it mean in practice? And we did a bunch of economics analysis, which have led us to this study that we do now. And we find that it's up to 99% cheaper to launch these attacks. Sometimes way more than that. You can add a small percentile to the end of it. And that's really bad. And sort of contrast, I'm going to stop and pause for you guys soon. But the last thing I want to say is that I collaborated with some people working with, for example, North Korea as a cybercrime actor. And North Korea actually get a substantial amount of their GDP through cyber attacks, which is it's very, very interesting. And that's problematic for a lot of reasons. For example, the West places a lot of sanctions to stop their nuclear programs. Well, these sanctions, they're of course not useless, but they're a little bit more useless since they can launch cyber attacks and go around the legitimate trade. And a lot of these cyber attacks are enabled by phishing attacks. And again, now we stand in a position where phishing attacks will be cheaper and better. So there are a lot of problems that are sort of scattered around for this. Everything from, how should nations cope with this and stop these kind of cyber actors? How should the little guy protect himself? The scams to individuals are increasing rapidly. There just a couple of days ago, I had a friend who had his email compromised by a scam from another student that wasn't that student. And these things happen all over the world, of course. And so I think it is safe to say that since last year, most of our predictions have been quite accurate, and the AI deception market, we have to say that it is a market now, because that's what it is. It's an illegal market. It's been growing quite a lot, and to the best of my knowledge, it will continue to grow way more in the coming years.
So I'll let Marco kind of broaden this out as we continue, but I'm gonna stick with the first point on the collecting information. Which I believe was the first point, right? Yeah. Well, collecting targets, collecting information about them. Because I think a year ago, we were looking at things like ChatGPT. We could see where the creation of an email is easy. You give it the right prompt, the right information. You can have it create something realistic that would be readily received by by a target, right, recipient. And you pump that through some automation, and you, to your point, you can kind of scale that out for very little cost. But I've heard stories where collections of information, multiple sources of information have been used to determine the organizational structure, who reports to who. You can get your hands on some email communications, how they speak to each other, and use that to not just write an email faster, but to actually have context and to have insight into how these communications normally sound. So I don't know, have you seen any of that? And if so, how does this have impact? I mean, do you see bad actors getting access to data and using it in this way?
Yeah, Sean, that's a fantastic question. It's really good because I said a mouthful there, but you really picked up some of the key values. And that personalization is a key difference in our research now compared to last year. Just as a quick reminder, last year we had pretty broad emails that we used the language models created, such as offer this person a gift card at Starbucks and so forth. And it's quite easy to find out whether that will be relevant. It will honestly be relevant for most people. But it's quite simple. What we're doing this year, which is exactly what you're saying, is mimicking what a lot of criminals and attackers do, is to find way more granular information. Then you dig deep down and see not only is this person likely to go to Starbucks, but we can find out really close called information such as what type of language did this person talk to with different coworkers and different friends and different families? What type of projects do they work on right now? What goals do they have? What dreams do they have? And all these kind of information, because that's very often publicly available. Most people's digital footprint is massive, and the digital footprint is just the information you have available online. Even if you try to restrict it, it's very, very hard. Only a few people have no information whatsoever published online. And this is also a security operational trade-off from a personal perspective. Like, we want to market ourselves. We want to be out there. It's not often feasible to remove ourselves from the internet. But if we are, which most people are, then there's so much information we can find out, and that is being found out, exactly as you say. Attackers use this maliciously. For example, my friend who was recently hacked, they knew people that he communicated with daily, so they send an email from the legitimate email address of one of his friends that was hacked. So it's sort of a chain hack, but it's not just empty, half-relevant attacks. And in our presentation this year, we talk about different levels of personalization. So what we did last year, we now define as mild personalization. But this type of attacks that you mentioned and that we treat now, we call hyper-personalization. When you find out very granular information. And when you feed this to the language model over time, you can imagine all kinds of horror stories when the language models really creates a perfect linguistic style to mimic a friend. And then you combine this with these phishing best practices such as relevancy. So you know that you write an email in the linguistic style of a friend or a coworker in the perfect timing when it's your birthday or when you're about to have a business presentation. For example, next week, before I go up to the Black Hat stage, maybe the phisher could mimic one of the Black Hat organizers and send me, hey, Frederick, you need to update these slides now before you go up. And if that sounds perfect and comes from the right email address, I'm going to be a little bit stressed. I'll probably do that. So these attacks are becoming way more difficult to spot. And the worst thing about all this is that it's easy to make. That's one thing we show. We have a proof of concept to see that this is cheap, it's easy, the technology is out there. There's some security restrictions in these language models. We talk about that as well. They're quite easy to bypass. They're open source models. So these tools are basically readily available for all crime actors to use. And I think we'll see much more usage of that.
Can you highlight that point? So I guess if you're using something like a ChatGPT, it's going to have built-in walls and barriers and rules. But you're saying there are open source ones that developers can tweak, right? That they can remove some of those protections.
That's a fantastic point. And yes, the short answer is yes. So basically there are two ways that the AI companies try to protect against this, right? First of all, we can restrict the models. We can say that ChatGPT, if you say create a phishing email or create a bomb, it's going to say, no, I'm not going to do this. In the case of phishing, it's very, very difficult. And there's a lot of brilliant research who shows this. That says if you say create a marketing email instead of a phishing email, you can bypass this. And there are other ways, but basically it's really hard. Because also in the context of phishing and deception, the only real difference between the phishing email and the marketing email is the intention. And it's hard to know the intention. Again, back in the day when this email had poor grammar, they weren't so reasonable or logical, then you could spot them. But if it's a perfect email and only the intention matters, then these language models have to be useful. So it's very hard to block reasonable content. But even if the security mechanisms were perfect, which I don't think they will ever be, but even if they were, there's a lot of research on jailbreaking these models, which is basically to take the model and remove the security features. And that works pretty well, unfortunately. We have even done some small demonstrations in my team to show that how you can do this to remove security modifications very easily, and then you can outright say, create a phishing email that targets depressed people, for example, which is terrible. But yeah, so there are some security mechanisms, but they're unfortunately pretty easy to bypass.
Wow. So many places I could go, but I'm going to connect with the conversation we just had about ransomware as a service. And I can totally see phishing, of course, as a service. Like you take the good AI, you turn it bad, and there's no guardrails anymore, and then you can give it to anyone that wants to do phishing. So I think the big issue, and what I grasp from what you said is, of course, it makes it easier to do the research. It makes it easier to do the email, even for those that don't have the knowledge to do that, and it's scalable, right? Yeah. So, I mean, I look back and I remember I used to have this conversation with social engineers, back 10 years ago when we started ITSPmagazine, and I would go back and yep, there is the Spanish prisoner letter, there is the Nigerian prince, and people fall for it, and they were, pretty easy to spot, but people will fall for it anyway. And then it was there was really high level target where you would have research intelligence and kind of like the stuff that the spy movies are made of. And now you're giving the spy stuff to everyone, to any criminal that you want. So where I want to go with this, the question is, as there is the AI that you can turn, the good one, air quote, that you can turn into a bad one, then there is the good one that you can use to fight, I'm assuming, the bad one, to spot this kind of stuff. Where are we standing with that? Because if there is an economic value for cybercriminal, I feel like there is a really big economic value for company to come up with a solution to this.
Yeah, that's a great question. And there's a lot of anti-phishing providers and so forth, and spam filter detection services that tries to solve this. And the short summary is that there is some hope and there is some really good potential solutions. One problem that I and my team find really bad, and we talk about this in our latest article that I might be able to share in the Harvard Business Review, is that in the context of phishing, we really find that there's an asymmetrical advantage that benefits the attacker way more than the defender. And the reason for this is that if we start with an example of non-phishing, so technical cybersecurity, well, then the attackers can use AI to improve their attacks, but the defenders will, of course, use the AI to improve the defenses, and you can find out code vulnerabilities and so forth. But in phishing, we talk about humans, and we can't patch the human brain. This is an old biological construct, right? So it doesn't work in the same way. There are workarounds, and we can use AI for good, but the attack methods are so much more powerful. And again, AI, you can use AI to train humans, but that is way more inefficient than in the attacking. So in this sense, I'm more skeptical, far more skeptical, in how this will play out in the context of deception rather than technical cybersecurity. Again,
what about the technical aspect, let's say the spam filters? So, like an enhanced part of that. I mean, you can't fix the brain until not yet.
So that's a great question, right? And we have something we talk about in our presentation this year called personalized spam filter that we work on. And they're quite promising. It's basically by knowing all this information that we collect about our participants, we can take that information and create spam filters that target your specific needs. Because there is no one-size-fits-all phishing email. Some people think one email is good and some people think it's bad and so forth. And by having a language model that knows these things, that's pretty powerful. It can also give recommendations saying that it doesn't have to be a binary spam filter saying yes or no, good or bad. It can say that this email could be true, but it could also be malicious. So just to be sure, go to the official website and find these links and so forth. And this is really good. I'm quite optimistic about this. The downside here is there's two things that make me a bit more skeptical. The first one is that, again, it's very expensive, not necessarily in monetary sense, but just in terms of time. People are relatively stressed. We will probably not ask a language model this for every email. And quite frankly, if you would have this check for all your emails, a lot of the emails ask you to take some call to action. So you would have this check for almost every email. So I don't think it will be widely used in practice. Again, if you have a security mechanism that takes 2 seconds, I think most people wouldn't use it because people are just too stressed. And so that's one problem. The other problem is that spam filters already exist and they're good. There's a lot of state-of-the-art algorithms with 95, 99% plus accuracy. So language models, they can improve spam filter accuracy, but these techniques aren't novel. They will marginally improve them at best. I think maybe they will improve them much more in the future. But so far, the spam filters are good already. So it would have been a different thing if we had no spam filters and then the language models came. But it's these things are good and promising. But in the attacker sense, we didn't really have a automatic tool to create phishing emails before. But now we have. So for the attacker, it's a game changer. But for defenders, it's I say now at best an incremental benefit. But we'll see. It's we obviously have to do what we can.
Yeah, it reminds me, or it's making me think of, I often think of healthcare when I think of this kind of thing, where we're looking to use technology like AI to provide better public health, right? So a broad view of what's going on publicly. Are there any trends or any peaks or spikes or any other anomalies that could point to something that would be interesting? And then there's, at the other end, precision healthcare, where specifically for somebody, the analysis of their, kind of to your point on an individual email targeting a certain person, what can we learn from that particular thing? And in between, there's maybe some different slices, like let's look at cancer, let's look at this type of threat. So I guess my question is, do we have enough? Because one of the things you pointed to, sorry, I'm kind of rambling a little bit here, but validating the results was one of the 5 steps. So clearly they have the knowledge of what's being done and what the result is, but I'm just wondering if there's something we can do in the context of what I just described in terms of public health and precision health and then the space in the middle. Can we leverage something that they have to get a better view of those different spectrums? I don't know if that makes sense or not, but
yeah, it makes a lot of sense, and at least to some degree. I'm going to deviate a little bit from what you say, but mostly answer it, because this you say a very good point. Is what can we do in terms of validating the results to use it for good? And that's probably the most exciting thing I find about our new study, and that's in these personalized spam filters, as we call them. We have a bunch of vulnerability categories, and these we take from traditional literature. There's a bunch of different marketing and other psychological literature for why people are influenced by things. And these things are such as authority, social peer pressure, etc., etc. And a lot of research has found, and again, this is old things that are already found by other people, but people tend to have different influence criteria that matter for them. Perhaps I am more vulnerable to peer pressure, and Marco is more vulnerable to authority. And that means, for example, if you want to convey me, if all my friends are doing something, maybe I would do it. If you want to convey Marco, you should get a police officer or some higher person and tell him something. Just for an example. And my theory is that these things are context dependent. So I don't have one influence principle that always works for me. They probably differ based on where I am, the mood I am, and so forth. But what we do in our tool that we're discussing now, that we created over the past year, is that the tool randomly creates phishing emails with different influence principles. Then it measures over time which emails do I fall for, which do Marco fall for, and which do Sean fall for, and so forth. And that's super exciting, because then what we can see is that, patterns that humans don't really see right now. And this pattern analysis, I'm very interested to see more in this. And for example, maybe if you do this on a large enough scale over a couple of years or months, we'll see that every Monday, I am very susceptible to social peer pressure. But every Wednesday, I'm susceptible to authority. Who knows? There are a lot of different patterns we can find. But if we find that, then we can make phishing training way more efficient, because then we can say that, what I should think about, I don't need to think about all this big set of, best practices, because that takes too much time and I'm never going to do it. But we can pin down one or two super simple principles, and that's what I think about. Then we can implement that in our daily lives. So I hope that makes sense. That was a mouthful, but I'm pretty excited about this new defense strategy.
It makes sense, but it's always about training. And I don't think people wants to be trained about this shit. I think
I was going to say Marco won't listen to anybody. So peers, police.
No, here's the thing. I mean,
and he just proves the point.
You get stuff in the email all the time. You get it in text, and I just block everybody. I mean, but I made my own decision, and sometimes it's like, well, you know what? If I catch the good fish and I don't eat it, that's okay. I'll take that risk, because I think defensively, as I think a lot of people that is in this industry or has been talking about this stuff long enough. But it's all psychology based, right? I mean, you're just describing that. If there is something that this is not technical, it's phishing. But technology makes it easier. So I still go back to, I don't think we should use the AI to do better training. I think we should use the AI to do, again, better filters. I don't think, as far as my experience, and I know we're dealing with some spam issues lately, I don't think spam is working that well, honestly. It's still, I think what you mentioned in terms of knowing the individual and knowing how to protect where the individual is more vulnerable because of the psychological traits. I think that's where the solutions stay. And if I think, for example, the Apple intelligence, right, where you finally will have a Siri that's going to be upgraded after 10 years to actually be useful, hopefully that will be one aspect that could be useful. Like, as a personal assistant, in order to perform better, you need to know more things about you. And we need to trust with the privacy where we go with that, because we don't want to give away information, but how is it going to protect us if we don't give away that information? How are you going to book a restaurant for me if I don't tell you that I like sushi and I don't like something else? And it goes deeper and deeper. If we can trust the AI, I think we can have a really strong defense against phishing. It will be our own extension of
it's interesting. Because for decades we talk about analyzing the infrastructure and identifying where the exposures are, what's internal and what can be compromised internally, what's publicly available and what can be used to compromise the systems externally. And I think at a personal level, we might bring in threat intelligence from an executive perspective or a company perspective. Is the company being targeted? Is the industry being targeted? Are the executives being mentioned in threads or whatever it is? But what I hear you describing, Marco, is kind of an analysis of us as humans. So the same type of analysis.
Applying that to ourselves, which...
Yeah, so all the stuff that they're doing to target us, and then marketers have been doing it for ages, right?
right?
Right. What's a good ad for us? Which one is A/B testing? All that stuff.
Well, I just
But we need to do that for the
book.
employees and citizens, or I don't know.
I just read an interesting book called "The Battle for Your Brain," which talk about all the scan of the brain, all the way that we're using monitoring non-invasive or invasive one, but non-invasive to detect if people driving a bus it's falling asleep, or if but in order to do that we need to give access to our thoughts, which then it becomes scary because you bring the thought police and all of that. But there is that cognitive freedom of thoughts also, though. Where do you bring in? Because it helps society to avoid 50 people on the bus to die because you're detecting that you're about to crash and falling asleep. So I don't know. It's we want to talk about societal repercussion of how we need to address certain things. Sean, yeah, that's exactly what I had in mind. Like apply to the company, to the infrastructure, to the organization, to ourselves. And I don't know what's good. It's a good movie to watch, I think.
Fred, what do you think about that?
Yeah, I think it's a fantastic point. There was quite a lot of things being said there, but one thing you said early on that I really resonate with is that you don't think people want to do this. And I think that's actually a fantastic point that a lot of folks like me forget to realize sometimes. And I during the past year, I've been talking a lot with different educational researchers to try to collaborate with them and see how can we solve this? Because as you said, sometimes we have to make people want to do this. And that's very interesting. And they say a lot of things that for me have been unintuitive, such as you have to make this fun for people. You have to find people, some way for people to find this useful. Why should they undergo training to learn this thing? And I think there's an inherent problem with these things that even if I think about myself, I'm pretty busy. I don't have too much time. We don't want to. Cybersecurity is always a game of defense, right? And that's a problem because people want to add value to their life. And defense is never fun because it just means training you to not have a potential loss. And I don't think there's a clear-cut answer to that. Your Apple metaphor or story is very interesting, right? Because somehow you can add a tool or Siri, and there's a lot of people who wouldn't trust that, of course. But if this works well, you can add a tool that adds value to your life because it helps you to book restaurants and know people to talk to and so forth. But as a sort of by consequence or a side consequence of that, that could also help you protect you against phishing. And that's brilliant, right? I really like that suggestion. So overall, I can just agree to the problem that making this fun and interesting and just incentivize people to think about this, it's quite tricky.
Yeah, it's not fun. Let's face it.
No. Well, what I'm hearing is that at some point, the technology companies that are enhancing our lives and some that are protecting us from all those enhancements that go awry will need more information about us in order to protect us as humans, not just what machine we're running and I mean spam and phishing, and let's forget spam, but phishing, it's still very prevalent. It's probably one of the most used ways to penetrate an organization and gain access to things. And I don't know. I think we talk about it as a human problem, and we have the training, all this stuff that Marco's talking about, and I don't know that we have an answer. And maybe the answer is in, we'll have to analyze us as humans. I don't know. It's interesting. I'm trying to think of what
Sean,
executives and businesses need to think about.
We haven't even touched on voice phishing with artificial intelligence that can mimic voice or visual. And imagine that, talking, Fred, about the timing of an attack. You're going to get a phishing email about, I don't know, click here to get a discount for this toy, probably before Christmas, the last week, when you're panicking and freaking out because you can't find the toy for your kids or whatever it is. I mean, there is a timing, right, for all these things. Yeah. And I remember we were on with a former CISO and military guy, Roland Coutier, that he knows what can be done, and he almost got fished by voice because he was such an emotional moment for him that he knew 99.9% that this wasn't somebody in his family, but can you be 100% sure when the value of what you're worrying about, the individual, it's so high. So it was a moment that you're like, we can all fall for this. And if you're not into this thinking that we are all the time, the regular person ain't gonna care.
Yeah, well, to me, it all comes back to the economics. And I think, I don't know how many, I know this is not a black hat conversation, but I don't know, 5 or 6, even the one we had with you, Fred, all touched on economics at some level. Yeah. And I think it's going to come down to that, and where do we make the investment? How do we make the investment? Isn't in the human on the tech? Is it the tech on the human? It's going to be interesting to see how this all plays out. I'm grateful that you're continuing to do the research, Fred, and providing us updates on what's going on. Anything else you want to share from the work you've done in the last year before we wrap?
Well, thanks for this discussion. It's been, as always, fantastically interesting to be here. And there's a lot of things and nothing to share, but there's, I think that we captured to some degree a lot of interesting things. There are definitely way more. I mean, you Marco, mentioned voice phishing. There are, of course, all the types of deep fakes and other types of phishing. And that's a big can of worms to open, right? Because it's protecting against these attacks. It's incredibly difficult. And I think one perhaps last word to say is that just you mentioned that to some degree also, Sean, now, but what's happening is that there's a change in trust, just the way we trust online and how we behave online, right? Because if these attacks continue to happen and happen at a massive scale, it's going to be hard. And somehow we have perhaps to change the way we operate, or at least to change the way we trust content and material. And hopefully there's going to come some brilliant technical solutions. Because both of you also mentioned the importance of having technical solutions. I believe that seamless technical ways that don't sort of disrupt the user experience, but it makes users more secure. This is very important, but I think that online trust is having a pretty rough future. It's already relatively low, but it's no clear answers. There's a lot of problems, and there's a lot of work ahead.
And what I love about this conversation, if people are watching, I can see the wheels spinning in your head. What you're going to do in the project next, which is really cool. I love these kind of conversations.
Yeah.
Well, listen, Fred, it's great to have you on. Of course, you're welcome back anytime. And any updates you have to share, feel free to just drop me a note and let me know, and we'll have you on again. Of course, have a listen to the Black Hat episode we recently recorded. I'll link to that as well, and the last year one, because it's still very relevant. It's not like that stuff goes away. We're just adding adding to the mix in this conversation with new and exciting stuff. But super fun chat, Marco. Glad you were on as well.
Glad I was on. Yeah.
I think we've given businesses stuff to think about, and CISO stuff to think about, and hopefully I have better answers soon. But definitely stay connected to Fred and the work he's doing, and obviously pay attention to phishing stuff you have going in your organization. All right. Well, thanks everybody for listening to this episode of Redefining Cybersecurity. Please do subscribe and share with your friends and enemies, and we'll see you on the next one. Thanks, everybody.
At Level Blue, we simplify securing your most valuable business assets by providing broad cybersecurity experience and award-winning services. Level Blue manages the risk. You reap the reward. Learn more at levelblue.com.
Imperva is the cybersecurity leader whose mission is to protect data and all paths to it with a suite of integrated application and data security solutions. Learn more at imperva.com.
We hope you enjoyed this episode of the Redefining Cybersecurity Podcast with Sean Martin. Please take a moment to rate the show and leave a comment. And remember to share the Redefining Cybersecurity Podcast with your friends, family, and colleagues. Come back for more conversations and follow Sean Martin as he continues his journey towards redefining cybersecurity.